All right. So we are back with Virko, and he's going to be talking to us a little bit about his
All
experiences
right.
with music and
We
how they've changed over a lifetime. Now, just a moment
are
ago, I
back.
was talking to you about
Going like,
how you perceived music when you were 7 years old. Do you want to talk more about that? Just
well,
how you started and everything about
yeah,
that?
I mean, there was an event that occurred that well, after World War II, not one, World War II, um, we were living in München, or Munich, as Americans say, in Germany, and then uh, we didn't know where else to go. I mean, I met my parents. I was just, trailing along after them um, because the displaced persons camp, as they call DP camps, were originally set up to, this was worked out with where else to go. I mean, okay, I'm hearing something double. What is that?
That was you on the delay. It's okay. You can keep talking. I turned that off.
And so they were set up to repatriate you back to the country where the Germans brought you to Germany to work, blah, 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 blah. Uh, repatriation. Well, we didn't want to be repatriated back to Ukraine because it was part of the Soviet Union. And that is something we definitely didn't want to do. So we did not go to this place persons camp on purpose. But when the Berlin event occurred, which was basically Stalin's attempt to get Western Berlin under his control, and that was not accepted by US and the others, and US then had these airlifts that brought in all kind of stuff to Berlin, and Stalin gave up. And
Mm,
so at that point in time, and then US and Soviet Union did not cohabitate anymore. And so we said, okay, we can go to this place, persons camp, and it became something else. It became a way for us to be there temporarily while we're trying to find a place where we can move, it's emigrate. Okay.
right.
So we were in the Regensburg, uh, and a lovely town. And the camp that we stayed in was an ex-army barracks for German army. Big place, actually, very, very large place. And like a lot of those, particularly the Germans made, they were complete villages. They had theater, they had restaurants, they had, I mean, by restaurants, I mean, food was supplied, etc., etc.
Hmm.
So we were there, and but it was essentially occupied mostly by Ukrainians, and the U.S. and others did that. They sort of went, for the most part, by ethnic groups, so that they didn't want to have any trouble, you
Yeah,
know.
right.
So and so there was a school established in Ukrainian, theater, film, blah 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 blah. So all those things were there, and there was a traveling group of bandurists, it was called, which is the bandura, which sort of looks like a lute of sorts.
Okay.
Usually a male chorus, sometimes with dancers, and came to Regensburg. We went to the concert. And there I heard a sort of a ballad, a kind of a historical song about Chuchulnik, who was obviously some kind of a Cossack or something like that. It doesn't really matter. But
Hmm.
and the music just captured me. This was the first time in my life, my young life, that I actually heard something that just emotionally moved me. Beautiful tune, very good ensemble, very good playing, combination of voices, and baturas. All of this created for me, what I call my first awakening.
Yeah.
Uh, and
And you're 7 or 10 years old, somewhere around there.
well, no, I was younger than that.
Oh, younger. Okay.
I was around 8 years old.
Okay.
Um, and anyway, so I didn't at that point in time thought that I was going to be a musician, but I certainly recognized that there was music that made a difference.
Hmm.
Um, and I think most people who are in music have an experience like that at one point or another. It can be later, it doesn't really matter. But
Right.
there's a point in which you can't be without music. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you become, performer or composer, but it does mean that will become intimate with music. And I've discovered that a lot of the friends that I had who were music lovers, uh, one of them never played music, but had a huge music library.
Hmm.
And the other one ended up playing the cello a little bit, but never was professional, but also loved music. And so you also learn the fact that everything or anything in life can become your passion, a vocation, without it being a profession.
Right. Absolutely.
Now, for you and me, it's now a profession as well.
Yeah.
But for me, it started really as falling in love,
Hmm.
and that's what happened. This was my first experience like that. And then it took a little while before the next one occurred. And the next one was when I was about 12 years old, 11, 12 years old, and that was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata,
Oh, of course. Yeah.
unexpected,
Yeah.
and Mozart's The Turkish Rondo.
Oh, that's another good one. Yeah.
Yeah, but they were tied the fact that I played those pieces at that point in time. Now, the
Hmm.
Moonlight Sonata, I didn't play the whole thing. I played the first movement only.
Right. Which is what so many of
I
us
didn't
do.
know the technique or anything else yet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I'll tell people, yeah, I played Moonlight Sonata in my master's program. They'll be like, oh, really? The entire thing? No, the first movement.
yeah,
That's
well, I
that's
mean,
kind of where we start.
yeah, I mean, uh, that was that is the movement that everybody remembers.
Right.
I mean, particularly the average person listening, average listener, the Moonlight Sonata means that first movement.
Yeah.
And my being fairly young still, I knew what the rest of it. I had the whole music, but
Hmm.
the Moonlight Sonata was what I played first, and then the Turkish Rondo was the first piece I performed publicly.
That's interesting.
And so those
I
are,
mean, Moonlight's the first piece that I played as well. The
yeah,
first one that I learned.
yeah. But I mean, it's very common experience, I think,
Yeah.
that you go through that. Uh, you listen, you hear, you perform it publicly, and then you go on the stage and play it for other people.
Yeah.
And for me, playing for other people occurred around 12, 13,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Uh, I was better known in the Ukrainian diaspora for reciting poetry uh, at various, what I would call holiday type of gatherings,
Hmm.
Independence Day, blah, blah, those kind of things. And I had very good memory, so I was able to memorize many, many lines and get on the stage. There's even a picture of mine, photo, reciting something. Um, and so that's what I did. That was my
Okay.
experience. Because at that point, I was very much into reading. Listening just started, but reading already began when I was 8, 9 years old.
Hmm.
I was um, I was a voracious reader, I guess is the word.
Yeah.
And part of it, the full of that is that I had what I call almost tuberculosis. Um, in other words, it really wasn't that, but it was at the stage already when I have spots on my lungs. Uh,
Mm.
you don't know, but they exist to this day
Yeah.
as scars.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So and those were the days where you didn't have access to a lot of medication.
Hmm.
You did, penicillin was hard to get,
Right.
um, but so your main form of working with that was rest and food, good
Hmm.
full of vitamins, etc., etc. So I ended up basically staying in bed for almost a year.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I would get up around the house and all the
Of
way, never go
course. Yeah.
outside, anything like that. And at that point, I started reading a lot. And I became quite good at it, of course, in Ukrainian. And at one point, my father gave me Goethe's Faust, the Ukrainian translation, and said,
Yeah.
"Why don't you
Good
read
to,
this?"
yeah.
And which I did, which was a little difficult.
Hmm.
And he asked me, "Did you read it?" And I, completely. And I said, "Yeah, I lied. I didn't
Right.
want to tell him that I'm finding it difficult." And he said,
Mhm.
he gave me a few questions I
Oh,
could
no.
answer. And
Follow-ups.
then he said, "Okay, read it again, and this time make notes. Start
Okay.
making notes." Now, this was important because
Yeah.
it started me with the whole idea of making notes. It stays with me to this day.
Hmm.
And so I did, and then he gave me a test, and okay. Then he says, "Now you're ready to get some Plato, Platon, so to say,
Hmm.
Plato." And the ones he did was the last uh, day or evening the life of the Platon did of what's his name, the daddy of that. Right now, it skipped my mind, and it's a very famous philosopher. Uh, it'll come during as more would come. I have, of course, 86. I have these blank spots that occur with names. And your
Yeah.
answer is what? Um, but so, and I got enamored in the idea of conversations because Plato's writing is in terms of conversations. All the philosophy that is discussed there is never written abstractly, but is written as conversations between people.
Hmm.
And I fell in love with that. I liked that very much. And I searched out for books later, and they were written as kind of fictional biographies by means
Right.
of conversation. So, anyway,
You weren't thinking of Socrates, were you?
yes,
Oh, okay. I
thank you.
thought maybe that was it, but I didn't want to.
No, no, no.
Thought it
And,
was too obvious.
and by the way, people who have the daring to listen to this stuff,
Yeah.
be aware that periodically I will stop and say, "I can't remember that word."
And
If-
this is just a good time to let everybody know that it's just joining. This is a Virko Bali. He's a Ukrainian composer. He's only 50 years old right now, so looks really good for his age.
That's a good line.
Yeah.
So, and that's when it all started for me. So I started taking notes and I started writing a little bit myself. So my first writings weren't musical, but were word writings.
Mhm.
So I would, make up stories and do all that kind of stuff. I had nothing to do except, lay around.
Yeah.
And there was no TV and there was really no radio for me because staying in a Ukrainian village, really what it was, my German was very perfunctory. So,
Were you
I,
playing piano at this point? Just
well, I
out of
learned
curiosity.
piano earlier and I was playing it, but, there were no teachers there
Yeah.
in piano. Particularly, I would go to a place where there was a piano. We didn't have the piano in the barracks, so uh, I was kind of separated from that as any experience that really mattered. But anyway, so my use of piano was done like that chorus that sang. I went to the piano, and then by ear,
Mhm.
kind of learn how to play it on the piano, so I would enjoy it. But anyway, so that was that, and then coming to the United States, which was quite an experience, and then getting our own place, and I got a couple of teachers at that point. One of them was kind of useless. My father took me there, and it was sort of a pedantic academic guy.
Mhm.
Uh, he, he did nothing to capture my imagination at all. And then I got one called DiMaggio. Can't remember his first name, but he was a conductor many years before then of a touring opera company called Opera di Monte Carlo,
Okay.
which toured around the United States. I imagine it was a kind of semi-professional. And the only thing he did, they showed me that he wrote a new and was published version of Ave Maria.
Okay.
And but he kind of sensed my interest in music, and he said, "Why don't we have lessons on Saturday? We'll have it around 10 a.m. because at 11 o'clock, the Metropolitan Opera comes on the radio."
Mm.
So I said, "Okay." And he had this large library of opera scores. That was not surprising. And so we would do our lesson, which consisted mainly of me reading stuff. He did some basic scales and things like that, but nothing very, but waltzes, whatever. We read. And then the opera. And once he saw that I was really interested in this, then whatever the opera was next week, he gave me a score, a piano reduction score. I would go home and that would be my lesson. I
Yeah.
would practice that. I would get to know it. Then the next Saturday, we listened to it. And of course, that's another time I discovered that by discovering what the music was about, I had an understanding of it even the first time I heard it.
Mhm.
It was almost like not first time, almost like the second or third or fourth time, because I had gone through the opera at the piano. Some places not very well, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, I did it. And so that went on for almost a year. And then my family's friends said, "Now listen, he's got to get a real piano teacher now." And so they discovered that there was Los Angeles Conservatory of Music.
Mhm.
And so we got in touch with that, and everybody suggested that I try to get Earl Voorhees. Earl Voorhees was a wonderful teacher and a very good pianist, although no longer performed.
Yeah.
Graduate of Juilliard. At the time when Juilliard was, when you to go to Juilliard, which would be in the 30s or 40s, you got accepted, you paid for nothing, nothing. You got a lodgings, you got a piano, and everything is school. It was full scholarship.
Mhm.
And he studied with Joseph Levine, but as he told me, mostly with his wife, Rosina Levine. Rosina Levine became very famous as a teacher because she was a teacher of Van Cliburn, who won then the first Tchaikovsky competition
Okay.
and caused, as we would say, a lot of furore. Uh,
Yeah.
and I remember going to hear him play at two concerts he did at Hollywood Bowl, and did the Tchaikovsky concerto, and then they did Rachmaninoff third. And when he did the Rachmaninoff third for encore, he did the Tchaikovsky. And so
Okay.
it was kind of not the whole movement, but the first movement, but he did do that. And it was, a very important event. A lot of people started getting interested in classical music because of that.
Hmm.
Uh, you have to understand that by that period of time, the United States and Soviet Union were in a very embroiled in the Cold War. And when Van Cliburn came there to be, he didn't think he would win, but Rosina thought they would recognize his ability and maybe hire him to do some concerts.
Right.
Because everybody was almost certain the Soviet Union would choose one of theirs, meaning one of the Russians, to win. This is the first international competition in the name of Tchaikovsky. Well, now, it makes sense, doesn't it?
Hmm.
But
Yeah, that does make sense.
Van Cliburn was a remarkable pianist and a remarkable presence. Very tall, sort of, he's from Texas. You put a cowboy hat on him, and it would fit. And technically wonderful, but also very musical.
Yeah.
And the one who heard him was Sviatoslav Richter. Probably, in my opinion, he and Gilels were the two great pianists of the Soviet Union. And said, this guy is a little genius.
Yeah.
He's, this because he's got to win. And so they convinced the politicians that this would be actually a remarkable thing for Soviet Union to do, to let one of their Cold War enemies, be the winner.
Yeah.
It was a PR
It
coup.
is a good PR stunt.
Yeah. And for us, suddenly everybody was buzzing about this thing called classical music. Because we have to understand that classical music in schools, grammar schools, was really not taught much at all.
Right.
So, and if they did, it would be in the band or some school orchestras, but very simplified, very easy. And
Wire recorders.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it made a difference. So it made a difference for us who were already into it. It gave us a kind of a model. So when you said I play the piano and I do this, so they would always say, "You heard of Van Cliburn?" Yes, of
Yeah.
course. You know, um, but that was an event, and it lasted for a number of years as event before, like all events, they die.
Hmm.
And so obviously, the Tchaikovsky and particularly Rachmaninoff third made a great impression on me. I mean, you can't help but like Tchaikovsky, but Rachmaninoff is a little more complex, and
Yeah.
I was quite bewitched by it.
Hmm.
So I started studying with Voorhees, and he felt that I had abilities, which I confess I did have. I even now remember I had certain abilities. The problem that I had was that by the time I started working with him, which was really around 13 going into 14, I was physically fully developed. My height was what was going to stay
Okay.
until gravity started making it shorter.
Yeah.
And my hands were the way they were, you know.
Hmm.
And the problem with that was that I I had to try to develop my technique with the hands I had, which haven't been practicing since I was 7 years old, from 2 to 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
Uh, and and one thing I regret is that my teacher did not simply say, no more pieces, just technique for the next 6 months.
Well, that's what you did with me.
I'm sorry?
That's what you did with me when in college.
Yeah,
You said, don't play pieces, just play
yeah,
thirds on the piano. Hannon. I mean, you gave me a lot of techniques.
Yeah,
And honestly, I'm grateful for that because I'm not a pianist, but I can get around the piano now.
yeah. So, but that's what I wanted to do. And then later on, I learned there was an American composer pianist called George Antheil.
Hmm.
And George Antheil was known as the bad boy of music. And the story about him is like this, that when he was already in, in his youthful adulthood, I would imagine probably somewhere around 20s or something like that, he fell in love with a girl from a upper caste family.
Hmm.
And they both were very attractive. So her parents took one look at him and said, "This is a bum," and sent their daughter to Europe.
Right.
So he said, "I got to get there somehow." And everybody told him he was very musically gifted. He was already writing music and doing all of that. So he decided the way to do it for him is to develop great pianistic chops. And he might get an agent, blah, blah.
Mm.
So the story goes like this. Now, I don't know to what extent is absolutely true, but I'm sure that something like that did happen. He
Yeah.
started practicing 8 hours a day. Now, his hands couldn't take that. That was beating. So he had like a fish bowl filled up with water and ice. And he would practice with the right hand. And then when the right hand got almost bloody, put it into cold water and then practice with the left hand. When
Hmm.
left hand got all put it in his hand and he took this one out and kept on. So he was like, like I don't know, like making Ford or something,
Yeah,
Uh, it was,
that's
but he
ridiculous.
got extraordinarily good
Okay.
very quickly. In a year, yeah. And he was always, of course, interested in new music, modern music. And at that time, modernism was in full early glow. And so he was able to get a tour. And so so he would go to Europe, but he began to play a lot of modern music.
Hmm.
The audiences were interested in it, but sometimes they were a little too much of that.
Yeah.
He took to Chicago. I think he lived in Chicago at that time. So he took the image of the gangster type.
Hmm.
So he had the haircut that way and the suit. He wasn't, I think, very tall. And he was versatile with the guns. So he would come to the concert hall after the audience
So
kind of booed
we're
him.
talking like mob gangster.
Yeah, mob
Yeah.
gangster,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
And so when he got booed a little bit about the program, and he said, "Okay, I got to do something about that." So his solution was he got a gun, put it in his pocket. He went and started, before he began to bow, did all of that. And before he started playing, he took the gun out, put it on the piano.
Okay.
And that had a magical spell on the audience.
So showmanship has always been a thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's
And
yeah.
he was notorious that way. I mean, he wrote a piece forgot, was it 6 or 8 um, pianos, which were on rolls
Hmm.
and some other instruments, and was played. And it was a notorious piece for that. It didn't work very well because when you had everything on rolls, mechanically they weren't synchronized very well.
Right.
So I heard the piece done at Washington, D.C., at the Smithsonian, but they had electric pianos, so they could really coordinate it.
So we're talking like the difference between a player piano and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
okay. So
exactly.
you said rolls. I just want to clarify because the term I've heard player piano. Just want to make
Yeah,
sure they're
yeah.
the same
Well,
thing.
that's a very good, very good. I'll take you on the road with me. And
Okay. Yeah.
but so he was that, and then he did an opera in which he had a wind machine
Mm.
do, and it was sort of turned in such a way so that the audience got some of it. And I mean, he was a sensationalist. And then he came back and he started doing some music for films and writing much more traditional. And he's got a couple of symphonies that you can still get and hear. And he became a good friends with Hedy Lamarr, the actress, who
Okay.
was brilliant, brilliant woman, and very much interested in science. As a matter of fact, when she became a superstar, the studio would build for her an experimental laboratory on the film studio inside it. So when she stopped shooting, she would go in there and do that. And
Oh
she
wow.
actually invented a couple of things that
Okay.
are still used to this day. But being a woman, she never got a credit for it until much,
Hmm.
much later.
Right.
Essentially, what it was how do you do not allow the enemy to hear your messages that you send electrically? Because if you send it from one source to the other source, they can interfere with it.
Right.
She came up with the idea that you have it go between two sources fed. In other words, for a minute or two, it's here. For a minute or two, it's on the other source that's sending. It was switched back and forth.
Mm.
And that was very difficult for the enemy to figure out how to do because they didn't know when it's going to change. So it never could get the message. And that was very useful
That's
during,
really smart.
during World War II.
Yeah.
Oh, she was very, very smart. I mean,
Hmm.
and extraordinarily beautiful.
Well, and in World War II, they used composers for code breakers too.
Yeah.
Musicians
So,
were often tagged for stuff
so
like that.
she did
Creative
a lot
types.
of movies that were known. Probably her most known one was Samson and Delilah,
Hmm.
big production. And she also did a film that was probably the film's first film where a future star was in the nude and things like that, you know. But extraordinary. So anyway, I got sort of involved with that whole idea of film as well
Hmm.
as music. But then the next piece that nailed me to the wall, and that one nailed me to the wall, was Beethoven's Piano Concerto Number 3.
Okay.
And once I heard that, and it was in Levine's class, at the end of a period, she would have a concerto concert, which usually consisted, most played one big movement, usually the first, with the piano accompaniment, being two pianos,
Hmm.
and the other person would play the orchestra part. And I just heard the first movement of that, but it just made an enormous effect on me. I was also very lucky that during my high school period, I went to Cathedral High, and the music director of the band there was what was his name? It'll come to me. Here we go
Yeah.
again, right? Um, very, very good composer. Ended up at in the end finally teaching at Northridge College. Uh, but he was the one who started teaching me theory.
Hmm.
I performed with him two piano concertos with band arrangement, the Grieg and Mendelssohn's Number 1 in G minor.
Okay.
And with the Mendelssohns, we actually toured through the various high schools and performed. And so by this time, I'm completely in. Okay,
Hmm.
there's really I didn't brag that I had a profession in mind because people would say, "Well, how do you know?" And I was reluctant to explain myself, and which sort of stayed with me for a long time.
Mhm.
But I said, this is what I want to do, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I find it's best not to tell people what you're gonna do and just do it.
Yeah.
You know.
So that went on, and when I was 18, I joined the Los Angeles Conservatory. And the composer there was a guy called Maurice Ruger. Very fine composer, actually. I'm surprised that nobody has attempted to kind of revive him a little bit. Um, Not great, but good.
Mhm.
And he was the one that sort of gave me another hint. Go to his theory class now, but at that point, I just went through it rather quickly because I was very well taught by the other composer. But there was a student who came in the beginning of a semester, and Morris right away said, "Play me something at the piano." He says, "I don't know the piano. Go back up, sign up for piano, and then we'll start."
Yeah.
And his theory was, how can I teach you harmony if you can't play harmony?
And
Simple.
piano's the best instrument for that.
Absolutely. Organ is also good, but
Yeah.
organ is too rich with overtones. It
Mhm.
can be a little confusing.
Yeah,
But
that's a good point.
by especially somebody coming in late to the game, um, and a lot of the new students at the conservatory were veterans of the Korean War,
Mhm.
and at that point in time, there are things that you're a veteran, you get a lot of things paid for you.
Yeah.
Uh, so it was a wonderful time in many ways. The recognition that arts were important.
Mhm.
So I went through that, and I started writing music. And when I at the conservatory, I got interested in the modernists. So the first piece that I finally wrote was a piece for cello, a sonata for cello, unaccompanied cello, uh, which was quasi serial. Um, I
Okay.
didn't follow it at all very diligently, but I used this as a kind of
Inspiration technique.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next was a piece for myself, a piano piece, which it was called Kaleidoscope. And it was based on a tone roll. So the idea of kaleidoscope, of course, you move it and it
Right.
changes and all that. So I used that throughout the whole thing. They were all miniatures,
Mhm.
but in spite of being an early piece, it was well structured. And I've used it throughout my life, the different pieces. I would use the theme from there or something
Yeah.
that line.
And miniatures are great for young composers to work with
Yeah, and then I
because you don't have
used
to
them.
worry about developing them too much.
Yeah, so I began to develop them and use them in larger pieces.
Mhm.
Piano concerto that I did, I liked, wow, 20, 25 years after that, like 30 years, uh, contained a couple of the themes. Uh,
It's
but
funny
now
how
I
that
have the
happens.
skill to develop it.
Right.
When I did the miniatures, I still didn't have the skills to go beyond that as well. But in miniatures, I actually did a very, very good. I saved three of the pieces when I call them, I just go, I call that the sins of my youth,
Mhm.
which is sort of a take on Rossini writing at the end of his life, a lot of piano pieces, and he called it the sins of my old age.
Oh,
So
okay.
I called it the sins of my youth. And I saved three of them into a little suite of early modernistic pieces. And I have it sort of part of my catalog. And so a lot of things began to fermenting at that point. I was tremendously interested in film.
Mhm.
So I would tend to see maybe 2, 3 films a week. And I went to the various theaters that were um, showing either European films or sort of the history of films. We
And
had,
you've written for film too, I
yes,
think. Yeah. So
again, much
this was
later.
an early influence, and then later on you actually
Well,
end up
yeah, but
writing.
I mean, for me, they really influenced, the film was a separate thing, but really influenced my sense of time,
Okay. Yeah.
because the film and music is tied in one way, that the film is cut certain way. So this lasts 5 seconds, this lasts a minute, and so on.
Yeah.
And music is the same way. You're very
Hmm.
conscious of how time flows.
Right.
So I found film very useful for that in terms of, and also intercutting. Uh, but I saw a lot of films from silent movies, a lot of films from the early speakers, from late 20s, 30s, 40s. Um, and the one film that I saw that really had a tremendous influence on me, period, was Jean Cocteau's Orphée, the
Hmm.
story Orpheus, but totally in modern settings. And it was kind of a magic film because it's based on his play. He had a play called Orphée. Then he took that and after World War II made a movie of it.
Yeah.
And he felt that what he wanted to do with it, the film would be better than the stage. And I can tell you a little one thing. The first time you see uh, Orphée, he meets, it's referred to as a princess. And she's got a few followers with her. And Orphée is a poet.
Mm.
And so she becomes a magnet for him. And he gets interested in who she is and so on. And he discovers through her assistant, who now becomes a friend of Faye, that she is deaf. And she lives in a mirror.
Oh, okay.
What do you mean? Well, death lives in the mirror. You don't believe it? Look in the mirror over the next 30 years and you will see death at work.
Yeah. Well, that's profound.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, but that kind of a thing made a tremendous impression on me.
Yeah, of course.
And so, but the scene there was when she takes him with her to be beyond the mirror, in other words, to a place where death and others like her originate. And you see him go with her through the mirror. And what he used, which was also potentially dangerous, was liquid mercury.
Oh yeah, they love to use that back
They used it, and I think he shot it from top where his hands go into it,
then. Hmm.
and then he comes out on the other side. And when he's there, he kind of gets completely, obviously. But prior to that, we see her magic powers because he follows her
Hmm.
in early stages. And they're in this house,
Right.
and he gets, I don't forget whether he gets hit or something happens, he falls down.
Hmm.
And she comes and sees with him, and she goes like this, and he gets up. And of course, the way it was done, it was shown shot one way, falling, and then shown in reverse,
Yeah.
getting up again.
Right. One of those movie
And
tricks.
yeah, and the actors were so good that this was almost like a dance when he comes out. and your
Hmm.
eyes go like, wow. Um, I mean, it's a simple thing,
Yeah.
but that simple thing is like in music where you suddenly go into a flat six chord, and it's unexpected and it opens your eyes to what certain possibilities.
Yeah.
So
Draws your attention in.
that became my thing. And Cocteau, and I got a book of his called Opium, because he was an opium addict, and he talks about the things that these drugs can do to you. I mean, 99% of the people simply can't become hooked on it, period. But
Mhm.
there is a small percentage that, in a way, their eyes and minds open up to hallucinations, which become very useful. And so, anyway, there are other things like that occurred. But
Right.
that became very important for me also. And at the point where I started thinking about making a little experimental movie myself, and I even rented a camera. It cost way too much money. We were able to shoot like about 10 minutes of it and realize that I didn't have the money for that.
If
I
you're
used,
young today, do you think maybe you would be making movies in 50
um,
years from now? Just given how easy it is to access a camera now.
yeah, I mean, I certainly would be interested in doing
Was it a financial barrier
that.
mostly or
Well, it was
creative?
mostly financial barrier, and although at that point in time I was already making money because I was teaching.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that can.
Earl Voorhees was, I mean, a wonderful example for me of what to do. When I came to his lesson, I was a little over 16, going on 17, in a car. He saw me. Said, your car? Yeah, my father got it for me. It was a Chevy. He says, okay, give me a telephone number and a name. He says, call them. I said, what's this? It's your first teacher, first lessons, private lessons.
Okay.
And they're the kind that want the teacher to come to their house. And I says, I don't know how to teach. And he looked at me and he says, weren't you taught once?
Yeah. Yeah.
Relive that. Okay.
I had a lesson today with a student, and she's getting ready to go into college, but she was offered the opportunity to assistant teach at a high school, but she felt like she wasn't ready yet. I said, "You will never be ready, and
No,
you
yeah,
you
exactly.
just need to take the opportunities when they
So,
come."
right, exactly. So, I mean, for me, it was like, okay, ready to go. So, all these things, I mean, I'm skipping a lot of things in between, but they were
Yeah.
always very important. And my father with taking notes, my father would read things, and if you don't understand it, read it again and take notes.
Yeah.
I told you about Earl Voorhees and Chopin Nocturne. I didn't know what to do with it. Copy it as if you were writing it.
Hmm.
All these things were, you know, I consider myself phenomenally lucky that I had these really people who were phenomenal. Brother Edwards, who taught us the whole idea of describe the obvious.
Hmm.
Um, that's what you have to do. And, a number of my friends, even older, when I would talk about that and explain to them what it was, would later tell me, I use that phrase now a lot.
Yeah.
How do I play this piece? Well, describe the obvious. How is it made? You know, um, so there's a story about Robert Schumann. By the time in the 1830s, Beethoven's Fifth was a kind of iconic idea of a piece.
Hmm.
It was a hit in a way, um, and composers and performers would argue about it. What does it mean? That opening is such a slap in the face in a way that everybody said, what does it mean? And of course, later on, victory, blah, 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 blah. But Schumann listened to them and said, I know what it means. Okay. He went to the piano and goes, pa 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 bum, pa 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 bum. That's what it means. It means what it is.
Yeah.
you know. And what it was implying was that the notes form a language. That what is a language? We are
Mm.
talking. How do you hear it? With your ears, right?
Yeah.
That's what that's and it really was because it wasn't written down. The early languages that our prehistory
Hmm.
didn't write things down first. Didn't that developed later?
Right.
It was the sound that developed, and the sounds how they were put together told you what the meaning was. The same thing goes here, and I have my own theories about that, which was one of them was that when you look at the notes G to E flat and F to D, and you play them in a row, G, F, E flat, D, it forms a lamento motif.
Yeah.
So, and it's C minor, makes sense. But lamentation is a very common musical idea for lots of people, for lots of composers. Okay, so this is where my various revelations come in, and I have these epiphanies or these awakenings. I went to see Orfei Awakening. I went to see a silent movie, and they would always play a recording of it.
Hmm.
First 78s and then LPs, and you discovered something else. That they would generally, the one theater that I went to all the time, they had only two pieces. They played for every film. One of them was the Russian Eastern Overture of Rimsky-Korsakov. And I would see a movie and hear it, and occasionally there would be on the screen a slapping of the door, and then the orchestra would, ba-dam!
Right.
How did that happen? So when chance music came into being, I said, oh yeah. Now I call it luck rather than chance. Um, but luck has chance works better for that, the terminology.
Yeah.
But in human life or animal life, it's luck. And that luck plays a very, very important part in our lives. And when I got interested in Darwin and started reading that, there's a story about him. He had a big, garden where there were a lot of things you saw there, skeletons of animals, because he was investigating the idea
Hmm.
of oceans. So he was looking for that. And one day he was observing a mouse, and the mouse was wanting to go from these bushes across like a lawn into another set of bushes. And was very nervous. So he looked up and saw there was a hawk circling. And the mouse knew that there was a trouble. So he had to decide when to dart. So he made a more gesture at the point where he thought. Now, this is some people say, what do you mean he thought? Well, okay, you don't have to believe that. But
Yeah.
he decided
Okay.
to run at that point. So he didn't make it. The hawk got him at the end of the run. There was luck, bad luck,
Hmm.
because if he had went, you know, 30 seconds earlier or 30 seconds later, he would have made it. So the extent to which luck plays a role in your life, and to the extent that you make your luck
Right.
when an opportunity comes on that you don't necessarily know what it's going to be about.
Hmm.
And I learned that lesson from my father also. My father spent almost 3.5 years in Auschwitz during World War II.
Right.
And he first got there, and after the preliminary welcome beatings and all that, he was in this lager. And the couple came in with some other gentleman with him, which Father thought looked like the sort of physiognomy and all that, that probably were Jewish. And the couple said they are going to be building a, a laundry, a huge big thing to handle all the laundry of the thousands of prisoners they had, because they had to be washed.
Right.
And so he said, we need help for that. I don't know. I need to know who of you know how to do this. Because if I find out you don't know, I will shoot you on the spot. Everybody believed that, believe me.
Mhm.
So, and my father thought for a minute, this he was telling me, he said, if I can't learn how to wash clothes, I should be shot. He volunteered.
Wow.
That saved his life. The Germans were very methodical.
But he didn't know how. So he took a chance there.
Well, he
I
figured
mean,
out that
yeah,
this, the thing that's involved is douches, something
right.
that involves, and wetness. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not that much to think about.
Yeah.
You have to
But
learn it.
it's still
Well, the
a
threat was there.
decision, it's a decision.
Yeah, that threat was there.
Yeah.
But he grabbed the opportunity and he made a decision. He was that mouse that ran across, but he made it.
Yeah.
And I had the same experience when I was in the Army after my basic training. It was in Fort Ord, which is
Mhm.
Monterey. At the end of basic, I had a couple of weeks off, which I made good use of. And then I came back and went for advanced infantry training. But for me, it was going to be music.
Yeah.
But when I got there, I was welcomed by two CIA agents, and we had a talk. Oh, no, 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 that's later. Sorry. No, no, I got it. So anyway, the the captain of that outfit was also the conductor.
Hmm.
Now he came up in front of us. I played usually glockenspiel or piano or something like that, simples.
Yeah. Okay.
And he came up and said, "I we are now got contract with Armed Forces Network. They want a half an hour program for us every week. I can do 1 week, but I need to find somebody else who can do 3 weeks. Who in here has experience conducting?"
Yeah.
Now, my experience in conducting was the class in conducting that I had. That's it.
Yep.
And I remember, I guess, my father's lesson. I know how to do it.
You'll do it. Yeah.
So
Huh?
I did that, and I started, digging in the library, find out what they had. In those days, they had a lot of music, classical music arranged for bands. I mean, quite a bit. I mean, um, the overture to Tannhäuser, for instance, which is very difficult in the end to do. I tried to
Hmm.
do it with the band, and the string part, do it, is divided between clarinets. Never could make it
Yeah.
work. But I know it was done by professional bands. And anyway, so I started doing it, and I ran into a little interesting problem. You go, four is 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
three is 1, 2,
Right.
3.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so we're doing three, and I was used to 1, 2,
Uh-huh.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2,
Yep.
3. Okay. So, hey, aren't you supposed to go to the right?
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, I have to offer an explanation. Thinking it was Europe, I still had a bit of an accent. And I says, oh, I forgot in Eastern Europe. just accustomed to go this way, you know. They
Yeah, right.
swallowed it. Maybe they didn't, but they pretended like they did.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Stuff like
again,
that. Yeah.
yeah, you kind of save yourself. And no, I never thought that I would end up doing a lot of conducting.
Hmm.
This was the army stuff. This was a way for me to make my life easier. And sort of similar thing happened when I went to Germany. I was moved to Germany. The same thing. But by that time they knew that I'd done conducting. So the conductor there who was leaving said, Bali, take it over. You know. And the same thing we did concerts and recording for Frankfurt. And so I had to have it, generally speaking. It stayed with me over the life, sometimes getting the material too difficult to learn. And we spent a lot of time on it. And in the end, it was so performance.
Right.
Um, but all these things were things that sort of molded me. And when we were there during the summer, there was the German-American Relations Summer. What was that? The band went to villages, small towns,
Hmm.
medium-sized town, but we never went into a big town. I don't think we did. Did we? No, I don't think so. And we played for the soccer matches, which football is the real name for that because unlike our football, which never really kicks,
Right.
they kick all the time.
Yeah.
So, and we would play for them. And the thing that in Germany towns had was their songs. Each town would have their song. Now, bigger towns, the music would be printed. Smaller towns, no.
Right. Makes sense.
I would get the lead sheet because it would be a song known and it was published, but they would know orchestral parts or band parts. And I would make arrangements for that. So that put me in another situation where I would get a couple of days off to make the preparation, and I had to copy all the parts by hand as well.
Hmm.
So it took a lot of work, a lot of time. And then we would do that. I would go. So I would get the lead sheet song on Wednesday. Thursday, Friday, I did all the writing. We met Saturday morning. I handed out the parts, and then we went through them.
Okay.
Now, nothing was particularly difficult. And a lot of the band players were outside of their normal life, were professional band players or played an orchestra or something. So they were good.
Hmm.
So it went well. But that was another experience. And, you know, when I came home, I went back to piano playing. And when I came to Las Vegas, I started the Contemporary Music Festival. And there were things done with orchestra, but I would bring a conductor to do it, usually from outside, because they would bring a certain knowledge. And then one day I get a call from a guy called Russ Cantor, who was my a very active violinist. And he said, Virko, we're doing Verklärte of Schönberg, Transfigured Night, and we're having trouble staying together. If it's for a sextet, and it's a complicated piece.
It is, yeah.
So I said, okay, I'll come over. And I started working with them. And of course, all the stuff that for a year I was doing came back. And I was really, no, you got to do this. And before the last rehearsal, or two rehearsals before the performance, he called me and says, Virko, we would like you to conduct it on the concert.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you see what I'm talking about is this is luck,
Yeah.
but it's a luck that you have to be able to grasp and recognize it for what it is.
It's in a lot of ways how I got the visiting assistant professor position at UNLV because they needed somebody to teach Hungarian analysis. I had taken it in graduate school, but taking a course and teaching a course are two totally different things. So I said, yeah, of course I can teach that. And I spent many, many hours each night learning how to teach it
Yeah.
so that when I came to the class, I could actually do a good job. So yeah, you get opportunities, you have to take them.
Well, there's a historical example of that. Rimsky-Korsakov,
Yeah.
distinguished Russian composer. He belonged to a group, what you would call, who purposefully were what we would call amateurs,
Mhm.
professional amateurs. They did everything by ear, blah, 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 blah. Mussorgsky was one of those.
Yeah.
The whole thing. And then Korsakov wrote some pieces and liked, and he was hired by a school to teach theory. And he said, what I did, I stayed 1 week ahead of this class.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
No, I think, life is full of things like that.
yeah.
There isn't really um, I don't know what you would call it. There really isn't proper preparation for anything
I agree with that.
until you get into what I call highly academic subjects.
Hmm.
But even there, I think a lot is luck,
Yeah.
discovering a source, working with a person who happens to guide you inadvertently into something that you haven't thought of doing.
Yeah, I think there is a point of saturation in a way because I'm now at a point where if I come across anything new, I can learn it very quickly because I have so many other connections for it.
Yeah,
So even if it's brand new. So there is that, but yeah, so many of the things I did, we all have done in our life. You're not prepared for it until you do it, and then you learn how to be
yeah,
prepared for it.
and I think that is really the need. Or as somebody said, you become good after 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
And the number 10,000 is a good number to pick. It doesn't always have to be that. Sometimes it's 20,000. Sometimes it's 5,000 hours. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's much faster. But I mean, it sort of depends on what you bring to it already.
Hmm.
The more you bring to it, the less time it takes.
Yeah.
So be willing to grasp every possibility that you can.
I think I saw an interview by that guy who said that 10,000 hour thing, and he said it was kind of a made up number. It's
Oh,
not
yeah.
based on anything. And it was a number that I felt was large enough that people would realize they'd have to put some time in.
Yeah. Yeah,
That was
exactly.
the idea.
Right. But I mean, it's it's important to remember that it is ours. It's not
It
minutes,
is. Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like
and
with ear training, it's hours, it's weeks, it's months, it's years,
yeah. So I
depending
think,
on where you're coming from.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think it's very important to remember that about yourself also.
Hmm.
That you are in a position after so many years, result of a lot of lucky moments.
Of course.
Some would say, well, it was a chance. No, luck.
It's luck. Yeah, I think
Luck
so.
is because you actually ran across the field. And boy, God, the hell got you.
Yeah,
Bad luck.
right.
And
And you have to move to get luck. You can't just sit in a bed all day and
right.
expect luck to hit you. Yeah.
And I would say that this is true in everything.
Hmm.
Certainly, my father's life proved that. I mean, so I had that. And the other thing is, I think it's important not to be catered to. When I was 17 and a half or something like that, I had my first hire. I was hired by a local orchestra,
Hmm.
Highland Park Symphony.
Okay.
There was a little sub town within LA called Highland Park on the way
Hmm.
to Pasadena.
Yeah.
And they had a little orchestra. And in those days, they were community orchestras and they they worked regularly. And
Hmm.
then a week before the concert, they hired X number of professionals to fill in the ranks. And also during that time, the rehearsals, they kind of kept everybody on their toes, made corrections and all that. And bingo, that was it. Usually the concertmaster or principals would already be there in the early stages.
Yeah.
But this would come in, fill in, and suddenly an orchestra was okay, became pretty good. So I did a Chopin piano concerto number one, and I got my first review because Highland Park had a little town newspaper that came out twice a week or once a week. I can't remember.
Even the little town has a critic.
Yeah. And she came to review it and had glowing things to say about it.
Hmm.
So I obviously I was tickled. I mean,
Yeah.
and I carried it with me, and any opportunity I got, I showed it to other people.
Yes,
Okay,
you have to do stuff like that a little bit.
so my
Yeah.
father, of course, was very happy about it. But we would be driving, and I would be, sitting there, and we were a group, and somebody, and they would talk to me, and I said, "Oh, I got did this and this and this and this," and this occurred like that for 3 days running, or something like that.
Hmm.
And the fourth day, as I was doing this, my father turned to me and said, "Stop it! What have you done since then?" Now, the American mentality would be, "Oh my God, he's hurting your ego. He's damaging you." Not at all. He taught me a very important lesson:
Yeah.
the ephemeral side of success. In Hollywood, they learn it now. You're as successful as your last movie.
It's true.
Okay? So keep doing it,
Hmm.
keep developing. And so that's also sort of became part of my ethos. It's you don't you use all of that, but you keep going.
Yeah.
You keep going. So the moral of the story is you got to always treat yourself as a student,
I agree with that.
no matter at what stage of life you've been accomplished in. Maybe you won the Nobel Prize or the Pulitzer Prizes or the Grammy or whatever. It means nothing. It's in the past.
Hmm.
It's history. What have you done since then?
Right.
And maybe on that we end this one.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're gonna try and do these every Saturday at 1:30 on your channel at Virko Bali Official. And there is a lot of information that Virko has to share about publishing, living as an artist, composer. I mean, you're a professor for how many years? That's part of it too.
Too many.
40? Too many? Yeah.
Well, actually,
Well, I think it's about as many as I've been alive, to be honest.
well, if you take a look at, say, I started working professionally, that is, getting paid for it,
Yeah,
when I was 17 years old,
yeah.
16, going on 17, and I'm 86 now. You
So
do the
2 or 3 years. I'm pretty good at math. I think that's 2 or 3 years. So you've got a little bit of experience here, and we're going to just keep trying to learn as much as we can from you. And we're going to keep doing these on Saturdays as you're available, because I think you're offering a great resource to current generations and even future generations. You have a lot of information to share. So thank you again for doing this with me. And you want to we'll plan on next week, and we'll see how things line up.
Thank you very much.